Hello everyone, today I'll be reviewing Spartacus. So Spartacus came out in 1960 and was directed by Stanley Kubrick and stars Kirk Douglas in the title role. So Spartacus is a slave in the Roman Empire, and at the start of this film we see a slave trader played by Peter Ustinov buy him. So then Spartacus has to take part in all these gladiatorial events where he's fighting people, but then eventually he leads a slave revolt, and with all these other slaves they battle to escape and pursue a new way of life and fight for their freedom. So although Stanley Kubrick is the director of this film, the initial director was actually Anthony Mann, but he was fired after a week of shooting, and in fact Kirk Douglas himself actually had quite a lot of control over this film. And it's probably because of this that this doesn't really feel like a Stanley Kubrick film. So I've seen lots of other films directed by Stanley Kubrick, like The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and they all feel like Stanley Kubrick films. And this one doesn't. It feels a lot more like a historical epic film from the 50s and 60s, which makes sense really. Nevertheless, this is still a very good film and actually probably one of my favourite Kubrick films. So Kirk Douglas is absolutely fantastic in this role. Spartacus is just an excellent character, and we really are rooting for him the whole time in this film. We really want him to succeed, but it's not just Kirk Douglas who's brilliant in this film, as this film has an excellent supporting cast. Laurence Olivier, Charles Lawton, Peter Ustinov, as I mentioned, Gene Simmons, and also Tony Curtis as well. Peter Ustinov is actually a very big highlight of this film. His character is almost a little bit comedic in this film. Although it's not as if he tells jokes and things like that, it's just the way he talks, the way he acts on screen is almost quite light-hearted given what is going on in this film. And there are a few darker elements in this film, but every time he's on screen, you can't help but smile a bit and sort of enjoy watching him on screen because he's a very funny character and quite a light-hearted actor when he plays his character on screen. Laurence Olivier is also excellent in this film, but he's one of those actors who is excellent at all the films that he's in anyway. Gene Simmons also very good as Verinia. She has a few romance scenes with Spartacus, and those are very interesting, though I do feel sometimes they are a little bit tacked on and perhaps a little bit corny now, but I suppose this is one of those films that maybe needs those sorts of scenes to keep it going a bit and to move it forward. So I appreciate that, and it's nice for Spartacus to have some female company obviously, so yeah, no complaints about that. And also Tony Curtis is actually very good in this film as Antoninus. However, his character doesn't really come into the story until a bit later on, but he does have some very important bits at the end, and he really ends up being Spartacus's right-hand man almost, and actually being a very important slave, a very important gladiator, and a very good warrior in general. So there are lots of scenes in this film which stand out to me, and although this is actually a very long film, so the version I watched had 12 extra minutes, the extended version, which is 3 hours 15 minutes altogether, there are lots of scenes throughout this film, and it actually does seem like quite a fast-paced film, particularly when you compare it to other epic films like Ben-Hur or Lawrence of Arabia, and because there are lots of action scenes in this film. And one of my favourite scenes actually is quite near the start of the film with the gladiators when they're fighting. There are some really good scenes here. There's a scene where Spartacus is fighting another gladiator, and you get this really great scene. So Spartacus only has a little sword and a tiny little shield, and the other guy has this massive spear and this net, and they're fighting each other in the ring, and it makes it a very entertaining scene. But really one of the best scenes is when the slaves are fighting against the Romans. We get this big shot of all these extras on screen, all these soldiers marching forwards and the slaves in the foreground and all the Romans in the background. And I'm watching it, I'm thinking, wow, this is really impressive, because you realise how difficult this must have been to film with all these extras taking part in just this one shot and just this one scene, and they're all marching in formation, and it's all very impressive. They're all marching forward, backwards, and right, left, and all over the place. Actually, this film is actually quite gruesome in a few scenes, particularly in the fight scenes. There is even one scene where one man gets his arm chopped off. So there are a few bits which are a little bit gruesome, even though this film is only a PG, which is quite surprising really. But anyway, bear in mind this film came out in 1960, so there's nothing worse than that, but still there were a few little bits which were quite surprising. It has to be said though that the most iconic scene in this film is where Laurence Olivier's character Crassus, the Roman general, he comes up to all the slaves and he wants them to identify Spartacus. So Kirk Douglas as Spartacus is about to stand up and announce himself when all of a sudden Tony Curtis's character Antoninus stands up and says, "I'm Spartacus." So Spartacus looks at him in shock and thinks, what's going on? And then another slave stands up and says, "I'm Spartacus." And another guy says, "I'm Spartacus." And before you know it, everyone is shouting, "I'm Spartacus." It's just such an iconic scene and probably the best scene in the film, to be honest, although there are lots of great scenes in this film. But this one really makes its mark and really shows how everyone can come together to work as a team and really just shows the true power of friendship in this film. In terms of the downsides of this film, well, I don't really think there are any, to be honest, except for maybe some of the scenes with Kirk Douglas and Gene Simmons with the romance story. Sometimes it does go on a little bit, but you know, once or twice is enough. But really with their interactions it does seem a little bit cheesy sometimes, I suppose. But then again, it is like this a lot with films from this era, and with these sorts of films it's to be expected anyway, so I can forgive it for that. And I really think that Gene Simmons does give a very good performance as Verinia, who is a British slave, so she's very good in this film, to be fair. So all in all, I have to say Spartacus is a fantastic film. It's actually probably one of my favourite films, although I realise I probably said that about quite a lot of films by now, but really it's up there. I like a lot of films and this is just one of those films that I really love, and I don't really have very much bad to say about it. So I am actually going to give it a rating of 10 out of 10. I know I give quite a few films 10 out of 10, but it's because I like lots of films and this is one of those films I absolutely love. And Stanley Kubrick actually is one of my favourite directors of all time, even though this doesn't feel like a proper Stanley Kubrick film. He obviously did have a lot of input on it, and you can see his mark on this film, particularly with the cinematography and the shots, and I must also mention the score as well by Alex North. It's fantastic. So there we go. So that is Spartacus. So what do you guys think? Have you seen Spartacus? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.